Tasha Williams had always been the backbone of her family, and figuratively, a single mother of two. She balanced 2 jobs, school meetings, and late-night shifts without complaint. But one rainy evening changed everything. She had been walking home from her second job when a poorly maintained sidewalk cracked beneath her feet. One misstep, a sharp pain, and she collapsed. The pain was immediate and blinding. Tasha tried to move, but her back refused to cooperate. Passers-by called an ambulance, and she was rushed to the nearest hospital. The diagnosis hit her like a sledgehammer: a severely fractured spine. She would need months of treatment, surgeries, and rehabilitation. Her life, once a careful juggling act, now felt like it had been thrown into chaos. Insurance barely covered the hospital bills, and the reality of unpaid rent, overdue utilities, and groceries weighed on her. Every day, she watched her children, little Mia and 7-year-old Jordan, cope with a mother who could barely get out of bed. Anger and frustration simmered inside her, but beneath it all was a burning sense of injustice. This wasn't just an accident. The cracked sidewalk had been reported multiple times, ignored by the city for months. People walked there daily, risking injury, yet no one had acted. Tasha realized that she had been failed not only by circumstance, but by a system that turned a blind eye to those who depended on it the most. As the weeks passed, the pain and bureaucracy weighed heavily. Letters from insurance companies felt like taunts. Calls to city officials went unanswered. Her doctors urged her to focus on healing, but she couldn't. She needed accountability. She needed justice, not just for herself, but for every parent who had to navigate a world that sometimes seemed determined to crush the most vulnerable. By the time she began researching legal options, she was exhausted but determined. Every story she read about people suing for damages over neglect, every case where corporations or municipalities were held accountable, became fuel for her resolve. Tasha knew that demanding compensation wasn't about greed, it was about standing up for herself and sending a message that negligence had consequences. Her attorney, a sharp-minded woman named Denise Harper, was impressed by Tasha's tenacity. "You have a strong case," she said during their first meeting. The sidewalk was known to be dangerous, and they did nothing. "We can make them pay, Tasha, not just for the injury, but for everything you've endured since." That evening, as Tasha looked at her children, struggling to finish their homework at the kitchen table, she felt a spark of hope. She might have been broken, but she was far from defeated. And she knew that, if the city thought they could ignore her pain and move on, they were sorely mistaken. Tasha's days had become a blur of physical therapy, phone calls, and paperwork. Each movement reminded her of the accident, the sudden snap of her back, the searing pain that had brought her to her knees. But the mental strain was worse. Being dependent on others was humbling and sometimes humiliating. Her children tried to help, but they were too young to understand the depth of her frustration. She hated needing them to lift her, fetch water, or even help her sit upright. Despite the pain, Tasha found herself growing angrier with every ignored complaint about that sidewalk. She had documented everything: the dates she had reported the hazard, the photos of the jagged concrete, even the emails to the city that went unanswered. The evidence was damning, and Denise Harper assured her it was enough to build a strong case. "What we're aiming for," Denise said one afternoon, her tone both cautious and firm, "is more than medical expenses. You've lost income, endured immense pain, and your life has been disrupted. That's what the $1.5 million claim represents." Tasha swallowed hard. It was a large number, almost unimaginable, but she knew it was justified. Every day, she thought of the groceries she couldn't buy, the bills she couldn't pay, the school trips she had missed. Her independence had been stolen by negligence, and she wasn't going to let it go unnoticed. As she started to prepare for the legal battle ahead, Tasha encountered a new layer of frustration, skepticism from friends and family. $1.5 million. Her cousin Tanya had asked, "Are you serious? That's a lot of money." "Yes," Tasha replied, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "It's a lot. But it's not about greed, it's about accountability. If this had been someone else, someone without kids, depending on them, they might have ignored it too. I can't let that happen. Her attorney arranged a meeting with a city representative, hoping to negotiate before going to court. But the official was dismissive, insisting that the sidewalk was maintained as required and that Tasha's injury was unfortunate, but not their responsibility. Tasha left the meeting seething, her fists clenched. There was no acknowledgement of fault, no apology. That night, she sat alone in her living room, ice packs strapped to her back, watching her children sleep. Jordan's small hand brushed hers in the darkness, and Mia whispered, "Mommy, will you be okay?" Tasha's heart ached, but it also strengthened her resolve. She nodded, brushing tears from her eyes. "Yes, baby, I'll be okay, and I'm going to make sure this never happens to anyone else." Over the following weeks, Tasha poured herself into building her case. She interviewed witnesses, collected statements, and reviewed city maintenance logs. Each discovery fueled her determination. The more she learned about the systemic negligence, the more she realized her fight was about justice, not just for herself, but for her community. Her days became a rhythm of pain and purpose. Physical therapy left her exhausted, but working with Denise gave her focus. She began speaking to local news outlets, telling her story to anyone who would listen. Her voice, once quiet and hesitant, became a beacon of defiance against a system that had overlooked her suffering. For Tasha, the fight was no longer just about a broken back, it was about proving that a single mother's life mattered, that her pain could not be dismissed, and that accountability could not be ignored. She was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that standing up for herself meant standing up for so many others who had been silenced. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. Tasha sat in the front row, her back still stiff from her injury, flanked by Denise Harper and a folder bursting with evidence. Today was the first hearing, and though nerves twisted in her stomach, she felt a strange mix of fear and determination. This was the moment she had been preparing for. Moment where her fight for justice would officially begin. The city's attorney arrived, impeccably dressed and exuding confidence. He was polite but cold, his eyes briefly scanning Tasha, as if trying to measure her resolve. "Ms. Williams," he said, "we hope to resolve this efficiently." But Tasha sensed the words were hollow, more a performance than genuine concern. She had learned early that bureaucracy rarely cared about pain or struggle, and this was no exception. Denise spoke first, laying out the evidence meticulously. Photographs of the cracked sidewalk, medical reports detailing Tasha's fractured spine, witness statements all painted a picture of negligence. Denise's voice was calm but firm, emphasizing the disruption to Tasha's life, the financial burdens, and the emotional trauma. Every point resonated with Tasha, who nodded silently, feeling a flicker of hope. The city's attorney countered with practiced ease, claiming that Tasha had assumed normal risks of walking in public, and that the sidewalk had been within maintenance standards. He waved away witness testimonies and cited obscure clauses from municipal codes. Tasha's heart sank, but Denise's hand on hers was grounding. "Ignore the theatrics," Denise whispered. "We're here for the truth." Outside the courtroom, Tasha struggled to catch her breath. The pain in her back radiated down her legs, but adrenaline pushed her forward. She spoke with reporters waiting in the hallway, recounting the accident, the ignored complaints, and the long nights of pain and worry. Cameras flashed, and for the first time, Tasha felt the power of her voice reaching beyond herself. At home, her children watched the news coverage with awe. Jordan whispered, "Mommy, people are listening." Mia hugged her tightly. In that moment, Tasha realized that her fight was no longer just personal, it had become public. And with public attention came both support and scrutiny. Weeks turned into months. Depositions, hearings, and legal paperwork consumed Tasha's life. Each setback, questions from skeptical witnesses, delays from the court, the city's repeated attempts to downplay the injury tested her resolve. She often left the courthouse in tears, physically and emotionally drained. But she refused to quit. Tasha's community began rallying around her. Local businesses offered donations for her mounting medical bills. Neighbors who had witnessed the dangerous sidewalk joined the case as witnesses. Social media amplified her story, generating conversations about municipal negligence, safety, and accountability. Tasha's pain had sparked a movement, however small, and that gave her strength. Late one night, as she journaled about the day's proceedings, Tasha reflected on her journey. The accident had taken so much: her independence, her comfort, and at times, her hope, but it had also awakened a fire she never knew she had. She realized that justice wasn't just about compensation. It was about ensuring that no one else would suffer in silence. And with that thought, Tasha clenched her fists, feeling both the ache in her back and the determination in her heart. The courtroom battles were far from over, and the road ahead promised challenges. But she knew one thing: she would not be silenced, she would not be ignored, and she would fight until the very end. The months of legal battles began to take their toll. Tasha's body ached constantly, the fractures in her back still raw despite surgery and therapy. She had grown used to living in pain, but the emotional strain of the lawsuit was another kind of suffering entirely. Every day brought new obstacles: delays in hearings, smirks from opposing lawyers, and bureaucratic loopholes designed to frustrate plaintiffs like her. Her children, once supportive and wide-eyed with admiration, began noticing her exhaustion. Mia would ask quietly, "Mommy, are you okay?" And Jordan would frown, trying to help with small chores around the house. Tasha appreciated their efforts, but guilt gnawed at her. She had promised them stability, and instead, she was trapped in a whirlwind of pain and paperwork. Friends and distant relatives offered advice, most of it unsolicited. "Maybe you should settle for less," one suggested. Another warned, "You're asking for too much, don't set yourself up for disappointment." Tasha smiled politely, but dismissed their words. This fight wasn't about money, it was about holding someone accountable, and she couldn't compromise her principles now. Denise Harper remained her anchor. "Tasha, you're doing everything right," she reassured her one afternoon in the cramped conference room filled with case files. "This isn't easy, but you have the evidence, the witnesses, and the truth on your side. Don't let the system wear you down." Despite Denise's encouragement, Tasha couldn't ignore the creeping doubt. Nights were the hardest. Alone in her dimly lit apartment, ice packs strapped to her back, she would stare at the ceiling and imagine the accident repeating itself over and over. She feared that perhaps the city's lawyers were right, that somehow she was fighting an unyielding system with no chance of real victory. Then came the day she received a threatening letter, thinly veiled but unmistakable. Someone had warned her to drop the case, hinting at consequences if she continued pursuing justice. Her heart raced as she read the words, and for the first time, fear settled in her chest like a stone. But alongside that fear, something unexpected. Whoever thought intimidation could sway her underestimated her strength. Tasha doubled down. She worked with Denise to ensure security measures were in place and continued documenting every step of her recovery. She reached out to local advocacy groups, sharing her story and connecting with others who had suffered due to negligence. Their encouragement reminded her that she wasn't alone in this fight, that her struggle was part of a larger battle for accountability. Her children remained her motivation. Mia's innocent questions and Jordan's unwavering loyalty fueled her determination. Every small victory in the courtroom, every sympathetic witness, and every news mention became a lifeline. Tasha reminded herself daily, the pain, the setbacks, and the threats were all part of the journey toward justice. And through it all, one truth remained unshakable. Tasha would not back down. She would continue to fight not just for $1.50 million or for recognition of her suffering, but for the principle that no one should be ignored when their life is broken by negligence. Every step was painful, every challenge daunting, but she had begun to realize that her strength was greater than she had ever imagined. Tasha was reviewing old city maintenance reports one rainy afternoon when she stumbled across something that made her blood run cold. Buried in the archives were repeated complaints about the very sidewalk that had ruined her life, complaints dating back over 2 years. Each report noted the cracked concrete, the uneven surfaces, and the danger to pedestrians, and each report had been ignored, left unresolved by the same officials who now claimed they had acted within maintenance standards. Her hands trembled as she called Denise. "Denise, you need to see this." They knew. They knew it was dangerous, and they did nothing. Denise's voice was steady, but there was a spark of excitement beneath her calm. "This changes everything, Tasha. This is proof of willful negligence. This could turn the case in our favor, and it gives us leverage in court." Tasha felt a mixture of relief and outrage. Relief because she finally had undeniable evidence. Outrage because she realized the city's negligence wasn't an accident. It was a repeated choice that endangered lives. She thought of herself, of her back, of the months she had spent in pain, and the mounting bills she could barely cover. This wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Armed with this new information, Denise began preparing a motion to introduce the documents as evidence of gross negligence. Tasha attended the next meeting, her back aching but her spirit alight. "They can't ignore this," Denise said firmly. "This is proof they failed their duty repeatedly, and we're going to make sure the court knows it." The city's legal team responded predictably. They attempted to discredit the reports, claiming administrative errors and outdated information. But Tasha, now deeply involved in every step of her case, had anticipated this. She presented the emails, the witness statements, and even screenshots of online complaints from neighbors. Each piece of evidence reinforced the story. The danger had been known, and action had not been taken. The courtroom drama escalated. Tasha's heart pounded as the judge reviewed the documents. She could feel the weight of her entire fight in the air, the pain, the frustration, the long nights, and the determination. Her attorney whispered, "This is the moment, Tasha. Stay strong. Tell your story when it's your turn." When the judge finally called her forward, Tasha's voice was calm but unwavering. She recounted the accident, her pain, her struggles, and the countless hours spent fighting not just for herself, but for the community. She spoke of the children who walked those sidewalks, of the ignored warnings, and of the negligence that had left her life forever changed. The room was silent, save for the occasional shuffle of papers. For the first time, Tasha felt a sense of justice taking shape. The city could try to hide behind bureaucracy and legal jargon, but the truth was now undeniable. And as she returned to her seat, a quiet determination settled over her. The fight was far from over, but now she had the upper hand. That night, Tasha sat with her children, her back still stiff, but her spirit lighter. "Mommy," Mia asked, her voice small but curious, "do you think they'll make it right?" Tasha smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "I don't know, baby. But I do know we're not going to stop until they do." And for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. Just as Tasha began to feel a spark of hope, the city's response arrived like a thunderclap. Their lawyers filed motions to dismiss parts of her claim, claiming procedural technicalities and disputing the validity of some witness statements. Even worse, anonymous messages began showing up at her apartment, threatening notes, vague warnings, and insinuations that she had overstepped. At first, Tasha was shaken. The combination of pain, exhaustion, and intimidation was overwhelming. Her nights were restless, haunted by the possibility that her fight for justice had turned into a target on her back. She worried about her children more than herself. "Are we safe here?" Jordan asked one evening, noticing the police reports she had filed after the threats. Tasha forced a reassuring smile, but inside, she felt the weight of responsibility crushing her. Denise was unwavering. "Tasha, they're trying to scare you into giving up. That is all this is. The truth is on our side, and we have the evidence to prove it. Stay focused." Her words reminded Tasha why she had started this fight in the first place. Fear was temporary. Justice had to last. The community rallied once again. Neighbors volunteered to keep watch around her apartment. Local businesses offered support, and online campaigns shared her story far and wide. People began calling the city, demanding accountability. The backlash forced some officials to at least respond, though still with the empty politeness that had characterized their previous attempts. At the same time, Tasha faced personal attacks in the press. Some outlets painted her as greedy or opportunistic, twisting her story to cast doubt on her motives. The anger bubbled inside her. How could society vilify the victim while excusing those responsible for her suffering? Denise advised her to ignore it publicly. But privately, Tasha couldn't help but stew in frustration. She channeled it into preparation, more research, more interviews, more evidence gathering. Her physical pain also intensified. Months of rehabilitation had left her back weaker than she wanted to admit. Sitting in the courtroom for long hours became torture, each movement a reminder of what she had endured. Yet she persisted, refusing to let her injury dictate the outcome. Every day, she reminded herself, the fight was bigger than her pain. One afternoon, during a deposition, Tasha met a former city worker willing to testify about ignored safety concerns. He described repeated warnings about crumbling sidewalks, budget cuts that prioritized other projects, and management meetings where complaints were dismissed. His testimony provided a critical layer to her case. The negligence wasn't accidental, it was deliberate, systemic, and preventable. Returning home that evening, Tasha hugged her children tightly. "We're not alone," she whispered to them. Her voice steady but soft. The support, the evidence, and the growing attention all reminded her that she was fighting not just for herself, but for others like her, those overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed by the system. As night fell, Tasha finally allowed herself a small, quiet moment of resolve. The battle ahead would be grueling, the opposition relentless, but she knew she was prepared. She had her voice, her evidence, and her children counting on her, and no amount of fear, pain, or intimidation would make her step down. She had survived the fall that broke her back. Now, she would survive the fight that sought justice not just for her, but for every person who had been ignored, silenced, or dismissed. News of Tasha's case began to spread beyond her small community. A local reporter who had followed her story for weeks published an in-depth feature highlighting the negligence, the ignored complaints, and the life-altering injury that had sparked her fight. Within days, the article went viral. People across the state shared it on social media, commenting on the injustice and praising her courage. The sudden attention brought both support and scrutiny. Some praised her bravery, while others questioned her motives, accusing her of exploiting her injury for publicity. Tasha learned to ignore the negativity, focusing instead on the growing wave of encouragement from those who understood her struggle. Every comment, every share, and every message of solidarity reminded her that her fight had become bigger than herself. With the media spotlight came new opportunities. Advocacy groups reached out, offering to connect her with experts who could testify about municipal negligence. Denise leveraged these contacts, strengthening Tasha's case with detailed reports about sidewalk maintenance standards, injury risks, and the city's failure to follow protocols. The evidence now painted a damning picture: negligence, repeated warnings, and a blatant disregard for public safety. Tasha also began receiving letters from others who had suffered due to the city's inaction. One woman recounted a fall that had resulted in a broken arm. Another described her child being injured in a similar incident. Each story fueled Tasha's resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person ignored by a system that should have protected them. Court dates became increasingly intense. The city's lawyers grew aggressive, challenging every witness and attempting to undermine Tasha's credibility. Yet, she remained composed. She rehearsed her testimony meticulously, ensuring she could recount the accident, her injuries, and the pain of her disrupted life without faltering. Her children's faces flashed in her mind during every cross-examination, reminding her of why this fight mattered. Outside the courtroom, Tasha's life remained a balancing act. She endured physical therapy sessions that left her exhausted, while also managing the emotional toll of her growing public profile. Interviews, community meetings, and social media campaigns consumed hours of her day. Some nights, she cried quietly in her bedroom, overwhelmed by the enormity of the battle. But each morning, she rose again, determined to push forward. Denise often reminded her, "Tasha, they can't ignore the truth forever. Your evidence, your story, and the public support are all on your side. Stay strong, because this is the turning point. Then came a pivotal moment. During a court session, the judge allowed the previously suppressed city reports to be entered as evidence. The room fell silent as the documents were reviewed, detailing repeated complaints and the city's failure to act. Tasha felt a rush of vindication. The evidence she had fought so hard to uncover now stood in front of everyone irrefutable and damning. As she returned home that evening, Tasha hugged Mia and Jordan tightly. "We're getting closer," she whispered. "We're finally being heard." The fight was far from over, but for the first time in months Tasha felt a glimmer of hope. Her voice, her determination, and her unwavering refusal to be silenced had begun to tip the scales. And with each passing day, she realized that justice was no longer a distant dream, it was within reach. The trial date loomed like a storm on the horizon. Tasha spent every waking hour preparing, working closely with Denise to rehearse her testimony, organize evidence, and anticipate every tactic the city's lawyers might use. Her back ached relentlessly, a constant reminder of what had been stolen from her. But she refused to let pain dictate her actions. The courtroom buzzed with tension on the first day of the trial. Reporters crowded the gallery, eager to capture every detail of the case that had captured public attention. Tasha's children sat quietly beside Denise, holding her hand tightly. She glanced at them, drawing strength from their presence. This fight wasn't just for her, it was for Mia, Jordan, and every person who had been neglected by the system. Opening statements set the stage. The city's attorney portrayed the accident as an unfortunate incident, insisting that maintenance protocols had been followed and that Tasha had assumed ordinary risks. Denise countered with precision, detailing the repeated complaints, ignored reports, and blatant negligence that had caused the injury. She emphasized the disruption to Tasha's life, the financial burdens, and the emotional toll, painting a vivid picture of suffering caused by systemic disregard. Witness after witness testified. Neighbors recounted prior complaints and near accidents on the same sidewalk. Medical experts explained the severity of Tasha's injuries and the long-term impact on her mobility and quality of life. Even the former city worker who had come forward earlier gave a compelling account of internal meetings where complaints were dismissed outright. Each testimony strengthened Tasha's case, and she felt a quiet vindication every time the court acknowledged the gravity of the evidence. Cross-examinations were brutal. The city's lawyers questioned every detail, attempting to cast doubt on timelines, exaggerate minor inconsistencies, and suggest that Tasha's injuries were somehow her own fault. But Tasha remained composed. She spoke clearly, recounting events exactly as they happened, and Denise deftly reinforced her credibility. Every attack only highlighted the contrast between Tasha's honesty and the city's repeated negligence. Outside the courtroom, the media coverage intensified. Social media campaigns highlighted the injustice, drawing national attention. Advocacy groups rallied in support, organizing petitions and public statements demanding accountability. Tasha's story became a symbol of courage and resilience, a single mother fighting back against a system designed to overlook her suffering. At home, the exhaustion was relentless. Physical therapy, court preparation, and media interviews left her drained. Yet every evening, she spent quiet moments with her children, reading bedtime stories and offering hugs that conveyed love and reassurance despite her own fatigue. She reminded herself daily that her fight had a purpose far beyond her own recovery. As the trial progressed, Tasha began to notice a subtle shift. Even the judge's demeanor seemed more attentive, more aware of the pattern of negligence laid bare by the evidence. The city's defenses, once confident and dismissive, appeared strained under the weight of testimony and documentation. Hope began to take root where doubt had once dominated. For the first time since the accident, Tasha allowed herself a sliver of optimism. She knew the road ahead would still be difficult, that the final judgment could bring disappointment as well as victory. But she also knew that she had done everything within her power to stand up for herself, for her children, and for everyone who had been overlooked by a careless system. Her back throbbed as she sat in the quiet of her apartment that night, but her heart felt lighter. The trial was far from over, yet each day brought her closer to justice. And Tasha knew, with unwavering certainty, that she would not rest until the city acknowledged the pain they had caused and took responsibility for their negligence. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. During the middle of the trial, Denise presented internal city emails that had somehow escaped prior discovery. The documents revealed conversations among city officials acknowledging the sidewalk's dangerous condition while deliberately postponing repairs due to budget concerns. Some emails even mentioned concerns about potential liability if accidents occurred, proof that negligence had been both known and ignored. Tasha felt her chest tighten as the judge reviewed the evidence. This was the confirmation she had hoped for. The undeniable proof that her injury was not an accident but a consequence of systemic disregard. The courtroom buzzed with a quiet tension. Whispers passed between reporters, lawyers, and court clerks. For the first time, it seemed the city's carefully constructed defense was faltering. The city's attorneys attempted to dismiss the emails as hearsay, claiming they were informal notes without legal bearing. Denise countered methodically, demonstrating the context, the chain of communication, and the repeated acknowledgement of the hazard by multiple officials. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "these documents show a pattern of deliberate neglect that directly resulted in Ms. Williams' life-altering injuries. They cannot be ignored." Tasha watched from her seat, her heart pounding. Each word, each revelation, was a vindication of the months she had spent gathering evidence, enduring pain, and fighting both bureaucracy and fear. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine victory, not just personal compensation, but a moment where accountability truly meant something. The judge paused, reviewing the documents, and listening carefully to Denise's argument. Tasha felt a mixture of apprehension and hope. She knew nothing was guaranteed. The city still had lawyers and procedural defenses, but the tide had shifted, and the momentum was now on her side. Outside the courtroom, the story quickly spread. National news outlets picked up the emails, highlighting the city's willful negligence and Tasha's relentless pursuit of justice. Social media erupted with support, calls for accountability, and admiration for her courage. Tasha's phone buzzed constantly with messages from strangers, neighbors, and advocacy groups, all offering encouragement and solidarity. At home, Tasha allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She sat on the couch, ice pack strapped to her back, and watched Mia and Jordan play quietly on the floor. The weight of the past months, the injury, the sleepless nights, the fear, and the uncertainty was still heavy, but the hope she felt now was undeniable. She had taken control of her story and forced a system to confront its failures. Denise reminded her that the case was far from over. "We still have a long road ahead," "The city will fight back, and there will be more obstacles. But this is the moment we've been waiting for. This is when the truth becomes undeniable." Tasha nodded, her determination stronger than ever. She thought of her children, her community, and every person who had been ignored or dismissed. This fight was bigger than her, bigger than the $1.5 million claim. It was about accountability, safety, and standing up when the system failed. That night, Tasha allowed herself a rare smile. The path ahead remained challenging, but she was no longer fighting blindly. The evidence, the momentum, and the growing public support had shifted the scales. And for the first time in months, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt since the accident: true hope. The courtroom felt heavier than usual that morning. Tasha sat with her hands folded, the familiar ache in her back, a constant reminder of the injury that had started this battle. Today was Critica. The city's lawyers had filed what they called a final motion, attempting to dismiss the case entirely. They claimed procedural errors, questioned the credibility of witnesses, and even suggested Tasha's injuries were exaggerated. Denise Harper was calm, but Tasha could see the tension in her eyes. "This is their last-ditch effort," Denise said quietly before the session began. "Ignore the theatrics. Focus on the truth. You've done everything right." As the city's attorneys presented their arguments, Tasha felt a surge of frustration. Their words were polished, rehearsed, and calculated to intimidate. But each time they tried to cast doubt, Tasha's mind returned to the emails, the witness statements, the photographs, and the countless hours she had spent proving their negligence. She had lived the pain, endured the bureaucracy, and gathered the undeniable evidence. When Denise rose to respond, Her voice was sharp and unwavering. She methodically dismantled each claim, using the internal emails to demonstrate that city officials had knowingly ignored repeated warnings. "This isn't just a technicality," Denise said firmly. "This is a story of willful negligence. And Ms. Williams' suffering is a direct result. To dismiss this case would be to ignore the truth and reward inaction." Tasha felt a flicker of pride as the judge nodded thoughtfully, reviewing the evidence carefully. For months, she had felt powerless, trapped by injury, bureaucracy, and public scrutiny. But now, in this courtroom, the truth was undeniable, and her voice carried weight. Outside, reporters and onlookers crowded the courthouse steps. Social media buzzed with support, sharing updates, praising her courage, and criticizing the city's repeated negligence. Tasha's story had become more than just a personal battle. It was a symbol of resistance against systemic failures, a narrative that inspired others to speak out. At home, she tried to rest, though sleep was elusive. The anticipation gnawed at her, mingling with the constant ache in her back. Mia and Jordan sensed the tension, offering hugs and quiet words of encouragement. "Mommy, you're going to win, right?" Mia asked, eyes wide. Tasha kissed her forehead. "We're getting there, baby. We're getting there." Over the next days, the court deliberated. Tasha continued physical therapy, enduring pain and fatigue, while Denise and her legal team prepared for the final hearing. They reviewed every piece of evidence, every testimony, and every argument, ensuring nothing could be left to chance. When the day of the final hearing arrived, Tasha entered the courtroom with a mixture of nerves and resolve. She knew the city would fight to the end, but she also knew she had done everything within her power. Every photograph, every witness, every document was a testament to her struggle, her courage, and her determination to see justice done. As she sat down, the judge addressed the courtroom. "We have reviewed all evidence, testimonies, and arguments. This case represents not only the matter at hand, but the broader implications of public safety and accountability." Tasha's heart pounded. The moment of truth was finally here. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Tasha sat with her hands clasped tightly, the ache in her back forgotten in the intensity of the moment. Her children, Mia and Jordan, were beside her, holding her hands as if transferring strength through their small grips. Months of pain, struggle, and relentless fighting had led to this defining moment. The judge cleared his throat, looking over the amassed evidence and testimony. After careful consideration of all documentation, witness statements, and expert analyses, it is clear that the plaintiff, Ms. Tasha Williams, sustained significant, life-altering injuries due to negligence on the part of the city. The repeated warnings about the hazardous condition of the sidewalk were ignored, and the resulting injury was preventable. Tasha's heart raced as the judge continued, his words slow but deliberate. "In light of the evidence presented, the city is held liable for damages incurred, including medical expenses, loss of income and pain and suffering. The court awards Ms. Williams $1.5 million in total compensation." Time seemed to pause. Tasha's mouth opened, then closed. The weight of months of uncertainty and struggle began to lift, replaced by a wave of relief, disbelief, and finally, joy. Tears welled in her eyes as she glanced at Denise, who smiled and gave her an encouraging nod. Her children hugged her tightly, their small arms offering comfort and celebration. "We did it, Mommy," Jordan whispered, his voice full of awe. Mia's eyes shimmered with tears, but her smile was radiant. Tasha held them close, the sound of their laughter and excitement filling the room with warmth she hadn't felt in months. The judge's gavel struck, sealing the verdict. For Tasha, it was more than just financial compensation. It was validation. Validation of her pain, her struggle, and her unwavering fight for justice. The months of frustration, fear, and exhaustion had culminated in this victory, proving that determination and truth could overcome bureaucracy and negligence. Outside the courthouse, reporters and cameras swarmed. Tasha answered questions calmly, her voice steady but emotional. "This is not just about me," she said. "This is about accountability, about standing up when systems fail, and about making sure others don't suffer the same way I did. Social media erupteth with praise, celebrating her courage and the long-overdue acknowledgement of the city's responsibility. That evening Tasha returned home with her children. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to relax fully. She sat on the couch, exhausted but triumphant, holding Mia and Jordan close. The battle had been grueling, physically and emotionally, but the victory was sweeter than she had ever imagined. As she reflected on the journey, Tasha realized the fight had changed her. She had discovered strength she didn't know existed, resilience in the face of adversity, and the power of standing up for herself and others. The injury had altered her life, but it had also awakened a determination and courage that would remain forever. Tasha smiled softly, brushing her children's hair from their faces. "We did it," she whispered. And for the first time since the accident, she truly believed it. Justice had been served. In the weeks following the verdict, Tasha's life began to shift in unexpected ways. The $1.5 million award brought relief, but it also brought new responsibilities. Paying off medical bills, catching up on rent, and securing a safe home for her children became her immediate focus. For the first time in months, she felt the weight of financial insecurity lift slightly, allowing her a moment to breathe. Media outlets continued to follow her story. Tasha appeared on local news segments and podcasts, sharing her journey and the lessons she had learned. Each interview reminded her of the power of her voice and the importance of advocacy. She spoke passionately about the need for safer public spaces, accountability from municipal authorities, and the courage required to challenge systemic negligence. The public response was overwhelmingly supportive. Messages flooded her social media inbox, some from parents who had experienced similar injuries, others from advocacy groups offering collaboration, and many from strangers praising her bravery. Tasha was moved by the solidarity, realizing that her fight had inspired more than just local attention. Her story had become a symbol of resilience, courage, and the pursuit of justice. Despite the victories, Tasha remained grounded in her daily reality. Physical therapy sessions continued, though progress was gradual. Simple tasks that had once been routine, bending, walking, lifting, reminded her of the injury's lasting impact. Yet each small improvement, each ache subsiding slightly, felt like a triumph. Her body was healing alongside her spirit. Tasha also began thinking about her children's future in a new way. With financial stability coming, she could invest in their education, health, and extracurricular activities. She enrolled them in programs they had missed, ensuring that the accident and her injury would not define their childhood. Her triumph became a lesson in perseverance, demonstrating to Mia and Jordan the value of standing up for what is right. Community members reached out, inviting Tasha to speak at schools, local councils, and safety forums. She embraced these opportunities, determined to use her experience to prevent similar accidents. Each time she recounted her journey, she reminded listeners that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Even with newfound attention, Tasha remained humble. She knew the victory was as much about persistence as it was about luck, timing, and support. She credited Denise, her children, and the neighbors who had stood with her every step of the way. "I couldn't have done it alone," she often said. "This was a community fight. A fight for all of us who've been overlooked." As weeks turned into months, Tasha felt a growing sense of empowerment. The accident had taken much from her, but it had also revealed a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. She began to plan not just for recovery, but for a life shaped by advocacy, courage, and the knowledge that standing up could change everything. And in the quiet moments, when Mia and Jordan slept peacefully, Tasha allowed herself to smile fully, knowing she had fought with everything she had and won. With the court case behind her, Tasha began to focus on something bigger than herself. She realized that the accident that had upended her life could now serve as a catalyst for change. Using her newfound public recognition, she reached out to local advocacy groups and city councils, determined to prevent similar injuries from happening to others. She launched a campaign called Safe Streets for All, highlighting dangerous sidewalks, inadequate public maintenance, and the consequences of negligence. Local schools invited her to speak, Community centers hosted forums, and social media amplified her message far beyond her neighborhood. Tasha's story became a rallying point for parents, seniors, and anyone concerned about public safety. Through her advocacy, she uncovered countless other hazards that had been ignored for years. Abandoned playground equipment, crumbling pathways, and unmarked construction zones were now being documented and reported thanks to the momentum Tasha had generated. City officials, once dismissive, found themselves under scrutiny from both the public and the press. For the first time, Tasha felt she had real influence. Her personal life also began to stabilize. The compensation allowed her to move into a safer home with her children, closer to schools and community resources. She could afford regular medical care and physical therapy without the constant anxiety of bills piling up. Tasha even found moments of joy in ordinary routine, cooking dinner with Mia and Jordan, walking in the park, and laughing without the shadow of financial strain looming overhead. Despite her victories, Tasha never lost sight of the struggle that had brought her here. She continued to speak about accountability and resilience, emphasizing that standing up for oneself often requires courage, persistence, and support. Her story inspired others to challenge negligence and demand change, proving that even one determined voice could spark a movement. Tasha's relationship with Denise deepened into a genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and shared triumphs. Denise encouraged her to consider further advocacy work, perhaps even policy initiatives, and Tasha began to entertain the idea of running programs focused on public safety awareness. Her personal battle had given her insight and credibility, and she wanted to leverage it for lasting impact. As she walked through her new neighborhood one evening, Mia and Jordan by her side, Tasha felt a quiet pride. The scars on her back reminded her of the pain endured, but her heart was full. She had turned tragedy into purpose, transforming an accident that could have left her broken into a mission that strengthened not only her family but her community. For Tasha, justice had never been just about money. It had always been about accountability, change, and ensuring that no one else would suffer as she had. And now, with every speech, every community meeting, and every reform she helped initiate, she knew she was fulfilling that promised: one sidewalk, one policy, and one life at a time. Just as Tasha began to feel the fruits of her advocacy, a new challenge emerged. A contractor working on city sidewalks publicly criticized her campaign, claiming that her case had unfairly targeted the municipal workforce and threatened ongoing projects. His statements were picked up by a few media outlets, sparking debates and skepticism about her motives. The sudden backlash was frustrating. Tasha knew she had to respond thoughtfully. Any misstep could undermine the credibility she had worked so hard to build. She consulted with Denise and her advocacy team, crafting a strategy that emphasized facts, transparency, and the broader mission of public safety. "We don't attack individuals," Denise reminded her. "We expose negligence and advocate for change. That's our strength." Tasha scheduled a press conference, determined to set the record straight. With Mia and Jordan watching quietly from the back, she addressed the media, emphasizing that her campaign targeted systemic issues, not individual workers. She highlighted the repeated warnings, the ignored maintenance requests, and the countless lives affected by unsafe sidewalks. Her voice was firm, calm, and unwavering. The public response was overwhelmingly supportive. Messages poured in from citizens who had suffered injuries or knew someone affected by municipal negligence. Community organizations offered collaboration, and local officials, realizing the weight of public scrutiny, began to acknowledge the validity of her concerns. Tasha's reputation as a credible and compassionate advocate solidified. Meanwhile, her personal life continued to flourish. With her children settled into their new schools and routines, Tasha found moments of peace and joy. She celebrated milestones with Mia and Jordan, from school awards to birthday parties, savoring the normalcy that had once felt out of reach. The scars on her back remained, a reminder of her journey, but they no longer defined her life. They were proof of her resilience. Tasha also began mentoring other women who had experienced injuries She shared her story, offering guidance on navigating legal battles, dealing with bureaucracy, and finding strength in adversity. Her influence extended beyond the local community. social media followers and advocacy networks sought her insights, making her a recognized figure in discussions about public safety and accountability. Despite the challenges and occasional setbacks, Tasha's mission was clear. She had transformed personal tragedy into a platform for change, demonstrating that one determined voice could influence policies, inspire communities, and hold institutions accountable. Every speech, every meeting, every sidewalk inspection reinforced her commitment. One evening, as she walked hand in hand with Mia and Jordan through the very sidewalks that had once been a source of danger, Tasha felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had faced threats, skepticism, and immense personal pain, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The fight for justice had become a journey of empowerment, not just for her, but for everyone her story touched. The years following her court victory brought profound changes to Tasha's life. The city, under mounting public pressure, implemented new safety measures. Sidewalks were repaired, inspections became more frequent, and accountability protocols were established to prevent future negligence. Tasha's advocacy had not only protected her own family, but countless others who had once walked the streets at risk. Her personal life flourished. Mia and Jordan thrived in their new school, excelling academically and socially. Tasha, though still mindful of her back and the limitations it imposed, found joy in everyday moments, cooking dinner, helping with homework, and sharing quiet evenings filled with laughter. The pain that had once dominated her existence now served as a reminder of her resilience, rather than a barrier to her happiness. Tasha's work as an advocate expanded beyond the city. She spoke at conferences, participated in panels about public safety and accountability, and mentored women navigating legal battles. Her story became a symbol of courage, determination, and the power of standing up for justice. The lessons she had learned, persistence, resilience, and the importance of community support, became guiding principles she shared with anyone willing to listen. Despite public recognition, Tasha remained humble. She never sought fame or accolades. Her mission was always rooted in protecting others and creating lasting change. She often reflected on the journey from the day of her accident to the present, marveling at how a life-altering injury had transformed into a platform for advocacy, empowerment, and hope. One evening, as she watched Mia and Jordan play in the yard of their new home, Tasha allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The scars on her back, though permanent, no longer defined her. They were a testament to survival, determination, and the strength that had carried her through the darkest days. She had turned tragedy into purpose, pain into action, and injustice into change. Tasha whispered to herself a soft, steady affirmation. I survived. I fought. I won. And now, we are safer because of it. She smiled, watching her children laugh under the fading sunlight. The journey had been arduous, but every struggle, every setback, and every moment of doubt had led to this: a life rebuilt, a voice heard, and a legacy of justice that would endure. Tasha knew that challenges would arise in the future, as they always did, but she also knew that nothing could break the strength she had discovered within herself. The accident had changed her, but it had also awakened a courage, resilience, and purpose that would guide her for the rest of her life. And in that moment, surrounded by her children, her community, and the life she had fought to reclaim, Tasha finally felt whole.